do that. And so welcome everybody. The Torah portion this week is Shoftim, and it's always around Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Elul. So we know that the high holiday season is rapidly approaching when we get to Shoftim. Tonight and tomorrow and Friday are the 2 days. Sometimes there's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. So it's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh of Elul. So when that happens, tonight and tomorrow is the 30th day of Av, and then Thursday night, Friday is the first day of Elul. So there's an interesting point. So Shoftim, if we're following along in the Eitz Chaim, it's page 1088, or in any edition of Chumash or Bible, it's Deuteronomy chapter 16, beginning with verse 18. So just related to this idea of the connection between Shoftim and Elul and the high holiday season, if we look below the line, this parsha is devoted almost entirely to the theme of justice, from the obligations of judges to limitations on the power of kings. The well-being of society depends neither on the goodwill of the ruler nor on the ascendance of the most capable in a competitive environment, but on the certainty that the law will treat all alike and will protect the most vulnerable against the most powerful. The absolute primacy of justice, a theme that occurs throughout the Torah, receives its greatest emphasis here. It has been said that since the time of Abraham, justice has spoken with a Hebrew accent. And what I wanted to say about that is that these judges are told in our portion, the very first sentence, you shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you. Well, so it's not a literal translation. Shoftim v'shotrim, magistrates and officials, or judges and magistrates. Titein lacha, appoint for you. Bechol sha'arecha, at all your gates. So that's the connection to Elul, because we have to start guarding our gates and preparing ourselves for being judged by God on Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. So as we prepare to stand before the judge of all judges, the supreme judge, who has the book of life and death before him, we have to prepare ourselves adequately. And so this whole season of Elul, which in the Sephardic tradition, they have that every morning, early morning, before davening the regular service, they would, Sephardi Jews add selichot to the service. So these penitential prayers of forgiveness to get into the mood of the high holidays. In the Ashkenazi tradition, that usually is reserved for the Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah, through that week before Rosh Hashanah, to add those penitential prayers. Hi, Rita. And we're just talking about Shoftim and its relationship to Elul and the high holiday season. And the other thing that's common to Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews is that at the end of the morning service, the shofar would be blown. So 4 blasts of the shofar, tekiyah, shivarim, teruah, and tekiyah gedolah. Those 4 blasts would be done at the end with no blessing, just as a reminder to get in the mood and to begin the repentance process. So repentance is associated with this theme of justice, and that we're asking for the supreme judge. See, the one theme of the high holiday season is trying to, we picture God as king and judge, right? And so we might have a problem theologically with picturing God in human forms in this way, but since rabbinic times, it's been the way that rabbis have done it to try to make it easier for us to connect to the themes of the holiday. So if those themes are embodied in what we imagine God to be, then that elevates the themes to a sacred, eternal, holy kind of approach. And so if we're asking for mercy on the high holiday season, if we're asking for forgiveness, then that is pictured as if we are asking God to move from the seat of justice to the seat of mercy. And so when God sits in heaven on the throne, we are beseeching God to have an aspect of mercy while God decides whether we're going to be written into the book of life or death for this coming year. And so that's the idea. So how are judges supposed to judge? So here, at the beginning of the portion, it says, Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol sha'arecha. They should be at your gates. Asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha lishpatecha, in all your settlements and your tribes. V'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. They shall govern the people or judge the people with due justice. So again, the Hebrew is a little bit, the English is a little bit deceiving because it's mishpat tzedek. So mishpat can mean justice, and tzedek means justice. Now we're familiar with the word tzedek, with the word tzaddik, or the Yiddish pronunciation would be a tzaddik. A righteous person would be called a tzaddik, but a tzaddik in modern Hebrew pronunciation. So there's a righteous person. That idea of being righteous is related to just, knowing what the right thing is to do at all time, and embodying that in one's personality and one's actions. So if you embody justice and righteousness into your being, then you are a tzaddik. And mishpat, so, if you're studying law in the university, you're studying mishpat, not tzedek. So, you see how these words are interrelated. So law, justice, righteousness are related together. So there's a comment below the line about the phrase mishpat tzedek, which is translated as due justice. So below the line it says Hebrew mishpat tzedek, Berkovitz. So Eliezer Berkovitz is a modern theologian, philosopher, lived in Israel. Not sure he's still alive or not. Distinguishes between these terms. So what's the, if there's only one word for justice, then there should only be one word. And if there's two words, why are there two words? So tzedek is justice in the sense of doing the right thing in a legal procedure. Mishpat is justice as a cosmic principle that maintains harmony in the world and makes possible the world's continued existence. So this is Eliezer Berkovitz's way of defining the difference between tzedek and mishpat. Tzedek is worldly, the active adjudication of a case, versus mishpat being this global, universal, sacred idea of what justice is. I don't know if that's accurate or not. There is also a difference. Mishpat is also related to the kind of commandment that we follow. So there are 613 commandments, that, as we all know, and there are different ways to divide them. And one way is those commandments that are chukim, a chok, a chukim, or those that are mishpat or mishpatim. So in that context, a chok is a commandment that doesn't necessarily make common sense or is logical, like the laws of kashrut. There's nothing logical about them. There's nothing inherent to say, Oh yeah, this makes sense that we have to refrain from eating pork, because in there's though some have argued that perhaps pork is not so healthy for you, no one argues that today, and pork is just as healthy to eat as chicken or beef, right? And some might argue that pork is even healthier than beef. So there's no independent logical argument to say that Jews should keep kosher. Rather, it's a chok. It's this law that we're just commanded to do because God says so. Shabbat is also a chok. There's no logical sense as to why we need to have a day off. You can make an argument for it. You can make a logical case for it, a philosophical argument to say it makes sense economically, sociologically, whatever. But there's no reason why Saturday has to be Shabbat as opposed to Thursday. Okay, so those two examples of many of a difference between a chok and a mishpat. But here in this context, mishpat tzedek, just the English is just making it easier by calling it do justice, and the philosopher commentator is highlighting a potential difference between mishpat and tzedek. So I just wanted to just begin with that idea that well, I wanted to get into also what the role of the judge is. So let's continue in the verse. So verse 19, lo tateh mishpat, lo takir panim, lo tikach shochad, ki hashochad ye'aver einei chachamim, v'yisalef divrei tzadikim. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. So a judge is supposed to be blind to any kind of influence, right? So a person should not, a judge shouldn't be partial to the poor over the rich, shouldn't be partial to the higher status the person has versus a lower status. It is about the judge is supposed to judge based on the merits of the case alone. Okay, and then verse 20, tzedek tirdof, it's a famous phrase, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So there's nothing here about the judge being allowed to be merciful, right? So there is, depending on different state courts, and whether it's a civil court or a capital case, there, depending on the state, there is room for the judge to be creative when it comes to sentencing, right? So that a judge, depending on the merits of the case and the person, the defendant, might decide that community service would be a better sentence for that person than actually sitting in jail. But there are some states that require, like the 3 strikes and you're out kind of sentencing requirements that a lot of states have. That no matter what, you know, I don't know, marijuana is becoming legal in a lot of states, but before it was legal, just having a couple grams of marijuana, does that make you into a despicable person? And if you're caught 3 times, you go to jail for 10 years? You know, we can argue the merits of sentencing for a variety of cases and crimes, and that the judges should have discretion when it comes to sentencing. And perhaps judges should be a little bit allowed to be merciful as well. Now, it's kind of hard, depending on the kind of case it is, whether you believe the defendant or not, in their sincerity, saying, I really didn't do it, I didn't mean it, I'm so sorry, I'll do better next time, whether a judge is going to be allowed to listen to those pleas or not. But we understand that being a judge, serving as a judge, is a nuanced position. And here in the Torah, it's teaching us the importance of being impartial. And for that already is an advancement possibly over other societies at the same time, about 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, that this would be an advancement, progressive based on other societies at the time. So how judges, the rules for judges in Israel today don't necessarily follow the Torah or the Talmud. There are political parties in Israel whose platform is make the Talmud the constitution of the state of Israel, but the secular state of Israel follows a mishmash of British, Ottoman, and Knesset legislation all rolled into one to determine how courts and the legal system work in Israel today. So I'm not up on on the American legal system as to whether there's guidelines for mercy when it comes to judges in this country. But like I said, it depends on the state and the kind of cases that are being brought, the kind of court that it is. There is room for some discretion. So, and another, again, if there are any questions or comments, just feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself or type a question into the chat. I did want to, there are a couple of other sections in this portion that not dealing with judges, but also dealing with other aspects of law that are interesting. Okay, so I'm just looking at my notes and which section do I want to look at today and what section might I want to look at on Shabbat. Okay, there's a section, if we turn ahead to page 1100. And so Bill has a non-urgent question. So what is that? So now you're teasing me, and so unmute yourself and ask the question.
I hear so often throughout the years that what the law in the Torah, the Jewish laws, we may not look at it today as being that progressive, but given where we were at the time, it's incredibly progressive. And I've always had an issue with that because it suggests that God is giving laws to us which you would think are universal for all time, but we're interpreting was really only being a good law for that moment in time.
Okay, so you raise a good point, and there's a response to that on page 1091 in the Eitz Chaim, based on verse 9. So it's chapter 17, verse 9 of Deuteronomy, and it says, Uvata el ha-kohanim ha-levi'im ve'el ha-shofet asher yihiyeh bayamim hahem ve'darashta ve'higidu lecha et devar ha-mishpat. And appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time and present your problem when they have announced to you the verdict in the case. Okay, so all of that means is if you have a case to be brought, then you need to go to the judge who's judging at that time. And if you look below the line in the gray box, every now and then there's a gray box on the page that talks about how this applies to Jewish law today. The sages, understanding judge as the literal meaning of the Hebrew word translated as magistrate, explain that every generation requires a rabbinical court to apply Jewish law to that generation's particular circumstances. Guided by the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, the local rabbi has this authority and fulfills the responsibility for conservative Jews. So in other words, what this verse suggests, not just to the conservative movement today, but to the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud 1,500 years ago, is that in every generation, rabbis have the right to interpret law, Jewish law, Torah law, for their generation. So when ultra-Orthodox Jews proclaim that they are Torah true Jews, what they are doing is presenting their ideology that they want Jewish practice and Jewish law to go back to the way it was. But that's not the way Jews have been. So in other words, the ultra-Orthodox who claim to be Torah true are actually wrong, because in every generation we have the right to interpret, to study, interpret, and derive Jewish law for our time. Okay, so granted, the conservative movement has been more radical in interpreting and evolving Jewish law than the Orthodox movement has been. But if you take a look at an Orthodox synagogue today and compare it to an Orthodox synagogue 20 years ago, you would see how progressive some Orthodox synagogues are today, right? So that, and they would even be willing, these open Orthodox synagogues and rabbis would even be willing to sit down with non-Orthodox rabbis. And there is even one such Orthodox rabbi in our area who's the immediate past president of the Washington Board of Rabbis, something unheard of when I first came to this area. When I was president of the Washington Board of Rabbis and tried to have Orthodox rabbis at that time to be part of the Board of Rabbis, I had a meeting with two rabbis who will go, I will not mention their names, who said, you know, we're willing to meet with you privately, Jonah, but there's no way that we're willing to sit down. We just can't do it for politics. So all that as a tangent to this point, that this verse, according to the rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud, grants the authority for every generation to interpret the law. So the law as presented here is not the law that we have to follow. And as I've said other times, you know, the law of eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which seems pretty clear and unambiguous in the Torah, was always understood by the rabbis to mean financial compensation. And there's nothing about financial compensation in the verse, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. There's nothing about money there. It's all about, if I'm just looking at my screen right now, Saul is right underneath me. So let's say he butted my head and broke my tooth on purpose, then I would have the right, according to the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth law, that I could butt his head and knock his tooth out as compensation for him injuring me on purpose, right? That's what that law says. But according to the rabbis, no, that's not what that law says. That law says that whatever my tooth is worth to me. So let's say I'm a professional hot dog eater. I need my teeth. And my tooth might be more valuable than somebody else whose job is to use their feet all day and never talk at all, right? So that's how the rabbis put it. Same with an eye. If you knock out an eye, if I'm a microbiologist, I need my eyes, and my eyes are valuable. But if I am, I don't know, you think of a profession where the eye isn't as important as a microbiologist. Eyes are important, of course, but you'd see what the rabbis are talking about. And that whole section that talks about this injury talks about the different jobs that people have, and relative age of somebody also when you injure somebody. Like if you injure a 99-year-old, it's a little bit different than injuring a 20-year-old in terms of future possibility for work, right? You don't expect the 99-year-old to continue doing manual labor in the fields as opposed to a 20-year-old would be doing. So all of this as an extension to say that I'm sorry, I just got a text and that. So all that to say that that the rabbis see that it is they have the authority based on the Torah itself to continue to look at law and to continue to interpret it and to derive new laws. Okay, so the other section I wanted to look at today is, okay, let's go to the very end of the portion where we find this unusual case that that might come forward. And this is chapter 21, and it's on page 1105 in the Eitz Chaim. So it's chapter 21, and it's the very end of the Torah portion. So it's through verse 9. So I just want to read this and discuss it for a little bit. See what the Torah is trying to teach us in this circumstance. If in the land, I'm just looking at the Hebrew and seeing why the English is doing it this way. If in the land that the Lord your God is assigning you to possess, someone slain is found lying in the open. So in other words, you find a dead body in the open field. The identity of the slayer not being known, so you have no idea who, and so it's clear that the person was slain, but it's not clear who did it. Your elders and magistrates shall go out and measure the distances from the corpse to the nearby towns. The elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall then take a heifer, which is a young cow, which has never been worked, which has never pulled in a yoke, and the elders of that town shall bring the heifer down to an ever-flowing wadi, which is not tilled or sown. There in the wadi, they shall break the heifer's neck. So before I continue, let me just lay out the situation. This body is found in a field, a Jewish body. You have no idea who murdered the person. So somebody has to take responsibility for this person. So the two closest towns measure the distance from their front gate to the town to the body. And whoever's closest has to take responsibility. So now taking responsibility is they take a heifer and bring it to this wadi, to this Nahal Eitan. My son's name is Eitan. Eitan means strong. So here it means a strong stream, means it's a flowing stream, as opposed to, if we've ever been to Israel, especially the wilderness areas, there are a lot of wadis, dry riverbeds there. And they tell you in the rainy season, be careful, because these riverbeds could have a flash flood in them. So it's not to a riverbed that could have a flash flood in it. It's a riverbed that has still water flowing in it. Okay? So you have to take the heifer down to this ever-flowing wadi. Then there, in the wadi, the elders of the town break the heifer's neck. So the heifer becomes a sacrifice in that town, as sacrifice in an unusual way. You're not slaughtering the heifer, as is usually done, and then offering it on the altar. No, you are breaking the neck of this heifer. Now, this is a young cow, but it's a cow nonetheless. If you just picture a cow, a three-year-old or younger cow, that's a heifer. It's a pretty big cow, and it's kind of hard to break a cow's neck. And it's not an easy job. And I'm not sure how they did it, because, at the same time, the Torah teaches we want tsa'ar ba'alei chayim. You want to treat animals nicely and without pain, and slaughtering an animal is supposed to be quick and painless. This is not necessarily quick, and it's not necessarily painless. There's practice in picture rodeo And what is the one where they they run after, they're on the horse with the lasso trying to catch the calf that's running ahead, right? And they have to kind of tie, they throw the lasso so that it goes around the calf's neck, and then you jump off the horse and you kind of have to wrestle the calf to the ground and tie up its legs. And all of that, I don't know, that one particular, it's one part of a rodeo, calf tying, whatever it is. And the quicker you can catch the calf, get off your horse, wrestle it to the ground, and tie the legs, then you win that competition. But this is more than that. Part of wrestling the calf to the ground is you grabbing the calf's head. So here, this is a cow, and you're grabbing it by the head and breaking the heifer's neck. So it's not a pleasant experience. Then, verse 5, the priests, sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to pronounce blessing in the name of the Lord. And every lawsuit in case of assault is subject to their ruling. Then all the elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the wadi. So apparently they're all the elders of the closest town to that corpse wash their hands in the stream and shake their hands dry over the heifer, and they shall make this declaration: our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Absolve, O Lord, your people Israel, whom you redeemed, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel. And they will be absolved of blood guilt. Thus you will remove from your midst guilt for the blood of the innocent, for you will be doing what is right in the sight of the Lord. So Diane, welcome. I just finished reading the end of the portion, Shoftim, this case of finding a corpse, an unclaimed corpse. So the question is, what is this all about? Why is this law here? What are we supposed to learn? What are the ethical, moral values that we're supposed to be learning from this taking responsibility for the unclaimed body? What does this mean? Why do we have to do this? Any thoughts or comments about that? It is, well, let me read you what it says below the line on page 1105. Innocent blood shed on Israelite soil pollutes the land and must be expiated. Okay, so what that means is the land of Israel is holy. And we know that from all of the laws of the Torah, from the book of Exodus through the book of Deuteronomy. The idea is that we're going into the holy land of Israel that God chose as the homeland for the Israelite people. When God made the covenant with Abraham and Sarah, the covenant was that that land over which Abraham and Sarah had walked throughout the land to kind of claim it as theirs, God says this land is your heritage as long as you follow the covenant. So it's the land belongs to the people of Israel who belong to the God of Israel, and they are all interconnected. So we have to act holy and be holy when we are in the land of Israel. So finding a corpse like this reflects unholiness. And so finding a corpse like this has made the land then impure, and the land has to be purified. And it reflects that people were impure and acted in an unholy way for this person to have been murdered in this way. So expiation is a fancy word for asking for repentance or asking for forgiveness, to make up for the wrong that has been done. So Maimonides, great Jewish thinker and legalist from 800 years ago, Maimonides suggests that the publicity will help apprehend the murderer. So if it's known that the ceremony is going to take place, perhaps then the murderer will feel nervous and will act in a way that will reveal his identity and allow people to catch him, right? So it's possible. The Talmud understands the oath of the town elders, right? What this section ends with, that it's verse 7 and 8. Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Absolve, O Lord, your people Israel, whom you redeemed, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel, right? That this oath of the town elders as an insistence that they did not permit a climate of lawlessness and violence to exist in their community. So there's that's from the Talmud. So there's that sense too, the obligation of towns to and all people of Israel to maintain law and order. And if a corpse is found slain outside a city, then that is the opposite of law and order. It is disorder, it is chaos. And that has to be taken care of. And who is responsible for that chaos? Obviously, there is a murderer. Somebody did it. But the elders are responsible because they're supposed to create the environment in the town. And all the elders of all the towns are supposed to create the appropriate environment and education in which people respect law and will want to treat each other as holy. And so if there is such a case as this unclaimed corpse, then it reflects some failure in some way on the part of the elders. And so they have to make up for it. The Midrash takes the oath to mean, in our community, no poor person goes unaided to the point of being driven to a life of crime. So there's a sense then, why would anybody consider becoming a criminal or a murderer? It must be because their economic circumstance has driven them to that point. Right, so it's like Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. So poor he has to break into a bakery and steal a loaf of bread. So, right, what does that say about society? I'm not talking about the rest of the play and the inspector Javert chasing him for the rest of his life, but it's about why does what kind of society is it that the poor are desperate enough to break the law in order to get food? It reflects poorly on the society that there are even poor people, right? So that when we see homeless people on the streets of our cities, we see other disadvantaged people, the mentally ill, how we treat them reflects the values of society, right? Not just the legal values of society, but the moral and ethical values of society. And the more that they are, that the poor and the disadvantaged are treated fairly and given opportunities, the more it reflects kindly on the rest of society. So when anything goes bad with society, it reflects badly on the leadership, and it reflects badly on the rest of the community. So it's in everybody's interest to ensure that everybody gets along with one another, because it leads to a just, fair, moral society. So that's a major element of what this law represents. And so the section concludes this ceremony, because of its puzzling elements, right? Why the heifer? Why measuring to see which town is closer to the corpse? Why break its neck as opposed to slaughtering it in the usual typical fashion? There is some puzzling elements to it. So this ceremony, because of its puzzling elements, is listed in rabbinic texts as a commandment for which there is no apparent reason, like a chok that I was talking about before. along with the goat sent to Azazel on the Day of Atonement, and the red cow of Numbers chapter 19, right? So the purification ceremony when coming into contact with the dead, a red heifer has to be offered and slaughtered and burnt to ashes, and the ashes mixed with water and hyssop and sprinkled onto the person, the impure person. So that's a bizarre ceremony for which we can't explain in any logical kind of way. And sending the goat to Azazel, right, for Yom Kippur, there are two goats that are offered as a sacrifice. One goat represents all the sins of the people, and that the Kohen offers on Yom Kippur. And the other goat has a red thread tied around its horns to represent the sins of the people also, and that is led into the wilderness. And the Mishnah describes for us how the goat is led, and then it is led to a cliff, and it's pushed off a cliff, and it is killed in that way. And that's a bizarre kind of sacrifice also. Why are we doing this? What is Azazel? All bizarre. So 3 bizarre cases of a few others that we could mention in the Torah too, that are just part of these laws that are presented as unusual. But the ceremony itself is unusual. The reason for doing it is not so much. It gets to the bigger moral, ethical questions, like last week's portion, which talked about specifically how to take care of the poor and the orphan and the widow and the Leviim in the community, and that the Torah says there will always be poor among you. So that's interesting too. If we have society and laws set up to ensure that the poor will be taken care of, then theoretically there won't be poor. But God says in last week's portion there will always be poor. And perhaps this bizarre ceremony of the pointing out to the extreme example of an unclaimed murder victim, there will always be crime in your community too. And so by having this ceremony and repeating the words, perhaps it'll eventually sink in and make the elders better leaders of the people, and the people themselves better people. It's like praying every day. The ideal would be 3 times a day as Jews, that we have intense spiritual moments with God. Well, that's nearly impossible to accomplish, except for the most saintly, the most mystically inclined people in the community, and there aren't that many of them, who might be able to get into a trance-like kind of place to be able to experience as if that they are experiencing God. When we pray, I would argue that we don't necessarily have that experience, but it's possible. But for me, the idea of praying is that the words that we're saying are supposed to have a lasting impact on our lives. And there's a power to and a reason to saying the same words at every service, right? We're not leaving it up to our spontaneity to come up with new words every time. Say the same words over and over again, and we'll get used to it, and perhaps they'll become part of our personality, and we will act like the words that we are praying for. And so with ceremonies like this, possibly too, that this is the idea that by reminding themselves of their responsibility, the elders will always strive for and act in a fair, just, equitable way. Any other thoughts or comments about this? One other idea, which we will end with, if we turn back to page 1100, one of the other laws that is presented here is this verse Yeah, no, it's page 1099. The bottom of 1099 on to 1100. It's verse 14 in chapter 19. It's the very beginning of the sixth aliyah. It says, Lo tasig gvul reacha asher gavlu rishonim benachalatcha asher timchal. You shall not move your countrymen's landmarks set up by previous generations in the property that will be allotted to you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. So on the surface, this law is talking about maintain boundaries. Boundaries between property are eternal, right? And we know that the land of Israel is divided into the tribes, and the tribal property of the land of Israel is subdivided to the families. And those families remain, those family plots remain, are supposed to remain for all time. And so those boundary lines, the gevul, the boundary, is supposed to stay. But this verse has come to mean lots of other things as well. How not to invade someone else's property. So if we look at below the line on 1100, later Jewish law expanded this admonition against encroachment to include other types of misappropriation, such as copyright violations. This is my property if you get it copyrighted. If you take advantage of it, if you have a trademark, for example, and you use somebody else's trademarked property, logo, slogan, whatever, then you are violating, you are encroaching their property. So it's just fascinating how a commandment like this can be interpreted and can evolve into other areas that it might not have reflected and couldn't even thought of. It could even reflect intellectual property rights as well, right? So what does the Torah know about that? And so the rabbis would say, absolutely, the Torah knew about that by saying a law in a way that can be interpreted in a modern way. Then that just shows the beauty of the words of the Torah, that something written 3,000 years ago can be interpreted in this modern, to apply to this modern technological society in which it means. Right. So, and also this comment ends, the moving of landmarks came to mean any unfair competition that encroached on another's ability to earn a livelihood. So, and the Talmud has many examples of this. It's also, it's about like big business coming in, the big box retail store coming in and encroaching on the mom and pop grocery store, right? And that if cases like that, many of us have relatives, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents who owned a mom and pop store in DC or Philadelphia, New York, whatever. There are mom and pop stores all around. But then there got to be supermarkets. And these chains of supermarkets bought out the mom and pop stores, or one mom and pop store owner bought out other mom and pop stores to open a bigger supermarket. So is that fair? Is it fair if you own a store on one corner and then somebody 2 corners away wants to open a store? Is that encroaching on your business? Is that fair? Well, there are municipal laws that argue about that, and then there's Jewish law that applies to that as well. So it makes for an interesting case. Where is someone's reasonable boundary line for their business? And it's one thing to have a stall in an open air market. It's another thing to have a brick and mortar store. What is and it would be for a doctor's office, a dentist's office, any other kind of business like this that relies on people in the area, is it fair to open a similar business in that person's area? Are you taking business away? It's also, it comes up in synagogues as well. And whether a synagogue can open in an area where there already is a synagogue. And you can make one argument, well, if it's an Orthodox synagogue that's already there and a non-Orthodox synagogue is opening, well, you can argue it's not competition at all because only non-Orthodox people would go to the new synagogue. But what if there's already a Reformed synagogue and another Reformed synagogue wants to go there? Or let's say there's a Reformed synagogue and a conservative synagogue wants to go there, or a conservative synagogue and another conservative synagogue wants to go there. It has happened. So for example, B'nai Tzedek, when it opened in Potomac, Har Shalom and B'nai Israel were not so happy with that because they argued to the United Synagogue Office in New York, the national umbrella organization of the conservative movement. B'nai Tzedek started as a conservative synagogue, wanted to build a building in Potomac. Har Shalom, conservative synagogue. B'nai Israel, conservative synagogue, argued, well, we already serve that community. And B'nai Tzedek argued, well, no, you're not. We're offering something a little bit different. So it was allowed to open. And you could make a demographic, you can do a demographic sociological study on the impact of B'nai Tzedek on Har Shalom and B'nai Israel's membership since then, or whether it even had an impact at all, or there are other bigger Jewish demographic issues that are at play about the vitality and strength of synagogues today. So all of this, I just wanted to point that out based on the Hasagat Gvul, the encroaching of boundary and what that means in today's Jewish law. Any questions, thoughts, or comments? So I want to wish everybody a good day. Please stay safe and healthy. We have Minyan this evening at 7:30 for those interested. And we'll see you all next Wednesday for another installment of Torah study. Take care, everybody.
Have a good day.
Yep.
Thank you.